and that's who we are joined by right now. Brett Siegel, national NBA insider and reporter for Clutch Points, talking about John Collins, De'Aaron Fox, the whole mess out here in Sacramento. Brett, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely, Allen. I appreciate you having me on.
Brett, let's start here. I read your article during the break, but for everybody just tuning in, listening, who haven't got a chance to check it out yet, and be sure to do that on clutchpoints.com. What are you hearing about John Collins and what I'm calling the trade that never was but still could be? What are you hearing?
Well, there's a lot to unpack with the Sacramento Kings right now, and it kind of all starts with the beginning of the year where nothing really went the way that ownership and management wanted with getting DeMar DeRozan and having his team be a top 4, top 5 team in the West. That didn't pan out. They ultimately fire Mike Brown. De'Aaron Fox starts receiving a lot of hate for this, and a lot of people pointing fingers at him, saying that it was his fault when he didn't have any involvement with it. And then obviously you have the recent rumors of De'Aaron Fox coming out about Rich Paul pushing for a trade from Sacramento. And now there's all this talk of, well, there was a trade that could have gone through over the last few days of John Collins could have been with the Sacramento Kings. The two sides talked at length about a potential deal, trying to find common ground here. Obviously, the two pieces that would have been going to the Jazz were Kevin Huerter and Trey Lyles, the two names that have been on the trade block for the Kings for months now. And we've been doing extensive reporting of that at Clutch Points. I know Michael Scotto of Hoops Type has done a fantastic job as well, highlighting about what the Kings have been looking for in trade packages for Kevin Huerter and Trey Lyles. And this was the package that they really looked at. It was John Collins, the guy that they wanted to add to their front court to add a little bit more rebounding help, a little more athleticism, and of course, some extra scoring that they aren't necessarily getting from Keegan Murray out at that power forward position. John Collins, a 6'9" forward. He's having a career year shooting-wise with the Utah Jazz, shooting north of 40%. But ultimately, these trade talks fell through, and a lot of it has to do with these recent rumors coming out about De'Aaron Fox and the Sacramento Kings front office having a lot of cold feet when it comes to making deals.
Because that's what I was going to ask next, Brett. From what you're hearing, and we're talking to Brett Siegel of Clutch Points, who covers the NBA. From what you're hearing, and in your article you say they were ultimately put on hold, not sure if these talks will heat back up. From what you're hearing, why did they get put on hold? Is that something that was more so on the Jazz side or more so on the Kings side?
There were a couple of discrepancies of the exact protections on the first round pick that would have been going to the Jazz. I wish I had the year that I could tell you of when this pick was going to be. But ultimately, that wasn't relayed to me. I want to believe that it was the 2028 first round pick that they were talking about, simply because of the current protections that the Sacramento Kings have on a pick that's owned by, I believe it's the Atlanta Hawks right now, where it's protected this year, and then those protections could convey to 2026. So I believe it was the 2028 pick that they were talking about here. Again, don't quote me on that. But in terms of the protections that were being discussed, obviously the Jazz are going to want to maximize value. They've been looking to maximize value on a guy like John Collins, and we know how tough Danny Ainge can be in trade talks with the Utah Jazz, not just when it comes to the Sacramento Kings, but any team that's looking to acquire some of his players. Those protections could have been worked out, and I'm told that they were essentially agreed upon of what the Kings would be trading out, and that's why they were giving that extra second-round pick in exchange for Collins. But the holdup, obviously, is the Sacramento Kings. Is this a trade that they actually want to make? They came up with the framework. They approached the Jazz for it. The Jazz came back with the counteroffer. It took a little bit of negotiating, but they had the framework of a deal put together. And then, obviously, you have the holdup with Sacramento not necessarily wanting to make this deal at this time, given the extensive interest that they are receiving in De'Aaron Fox. And based on my understanding of the situation and based on what I've been told, obviously others have done a lot of reporting on this. I know Sam Amick of The Athletic has done a fantastic job of covering De'Aaron Fox situation inside and out there. But they've been receiving a lot of calls on De'Aaron Fox lately. And from my understanding, the Kings are open to hearing these talks. And if they get the right deal, I would expect them to pull the trigger.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, Brett, there was already a little bit of cold feet with the deal. The Kings thought it was a little bit much. And while this is happening, then the De'Aaron Fox thing happens while the Jazz and Kings are trying to figure out something as well. Is that timeline correct?
Yes, it's a little bit of both. And also the De'Aaron Fox stuff goes back weeks. It's just coming out now
right,
because of this whole Clutch Sports and Rich Paul reaching out. to the media to get this story out there and kind of put pressure on the Kings stemming from his meeting with Kings ownership and Kings management several weeks ago before Brown was fired. So it's kind of like you look at it where the match lit the spark, and it's just kind of one of those things where you look at a cartoon, an old school cartoon where the the fuse is already set, and it's just kind of going down to the end, and you're just waiting for that explosion to happen. That's kind of where we're at with the Sacramento Kings. The fuse has been lit to this point.
And I have questions written down for you, Brett, but now that we're going in this direction with the trade deadline a week away, is there a world where the Kings, and I was going to ask you about Cam Johnson, but whether it's Cam Johnson and John Collins, Sam Amick was on the morning show and he says, essentially the toothpaste is out of the tube. You can't put it back in. So are we looking at a world where De'Aaron Fox gets moved that is more likely than the Kings trying to get a John Collins and Cam Johnson and say, hey, De'Aaron, we still got a shot at this. What's your feeling on that?
I wish I could give you a firm answer on that, because that's kind of the question that we're all asking around too, to try to get firm answers from the Sacramento Kings is, are you going to go out and be buyers, or are you going to be ultimate sellers? And then you have DeMar DeRozan earlier today on one of those FanDuel shows talking about how he came to Sacramento to try to win. And if that's not the case, he could potentially be moved too. So there's a lot of moving pieces here to talk about with the Kings. And obviously when you look at Cam Johnson, that's another guy that they held conversations with and extensive trade conversations with the Nets trying to get a deal done. Obviously, again, it comes back to the Kings not wanting to give up that kind of value for Cam Johnson that the Nets are seeking. They go and look elsewhere. John Collins is a guy that they can get on a much less price than Cam Johnson, I'll say. But again, it comes down to them having cold feet and not actually wanting to make that deal, facing the uncertainty of, well, does De'Aaron Fox actually want to be traded? Is there a trade that we can actually make over the course of the next week that doesn't blow up this team and we can still remain competitive after trading De'Aaron Fox? So there's a lot of moving pieces here. There's a lot of scenarios that Monty McNair and this front office are currently going through. And ultimately, it does spiral back to the fact that there's several teams interested in trading for De'Aaron Fox right now, even if he was to leave in 2026 and go to his desired landing spot, which is the San Antonio Spurs.
Talking to Brett Siegel of Clutch Points. Great stuff so far, Brett. Just as far as your opinion is concerned, what you're hearing, I know that Rasay Fox, De'Aaron's wife, has kind of gone back and forth with people on social media saying they never requested a trade. Do you feel like De'Aaron Fox actually wants out and they're doing the semantics Clutch playbook type thing? Or do you think that it truly, if when they had that meeting, let's say it takes two to tango, but the Lakers did get Dorian Finney-Smith not too long after that. They have that meeting in December. The next week, the Kings go out and get John Collins, Cam Johnson. Do you think that could have kept De'Aaron? Or, some people are saying the writing was already on the wall and this was De'Aaron. I had a source tell me that they felt that this was De'Aaron letting them down easy.
Yes and no. I think that obviously after that week of the meetings with the Kings front office and ownership, if they had gone out and made a move for, let's say, John Collins or Cam Johnson, that certainly changes thinking here. But I don't necessarily know if it's fully on De'Aaron Fox. I don't know if we can fully say, oh, well, he's the one wanting out. He's the player that we're all pointing the fingers to. I think that it goes right back to his management team, Rich Paul, because this isn't a new move for him. We saw this in the offseason with the Cleveland Cavaliers and Darius Garland. He put pressure on the Cavs front office to kind of go out and make a move and say, hey, we want Garland to not only be paid, which he is, but we also want you to show trust in him. We want him to be a focal point. We want the Cavaliers to be a great team. Obviously, we're seeing the Cavs are a great team this season, and they're looking like championship contenders in the East. And Darius Garland, he's the guy that didn't really want to trade from the Cavs, but would he have entertained it? Sure. And I think that's kind of where we're at with De'Aaron Fox. Does he 100% want to be traded from the Kings like Jimmy Butler wants to be traded from the Heat? No, I wouldn't definitively say that. I would say that if there is a path to De'Aaron Fox remaining with the Kings, it's the front office showing him that they're devoted to winning. They're going to sacrifice the assets needed to make this team as good as they can be with Fox, with Sabonis, with Monk, and with DeMar DeRozan. Obviously, there's a holdup right now. We'll see what direction they go ahead of the trade deadline, and that will 100% influence Fox's decision here of whether or not he truly wants out. But if you're asking a straight-up question of, is De'Aaron Fox the one pushing this? I would 100% say no.
Okay, Brett Siegel. Brett, thank you so much for joining us. That was great stuff, especially on short timing. So we appreciate you. Go check out that article. If you haven't seen it, it is on Brett's social media. Go follow him on X, on Twitter, and check out what he has broken down about the John Collins deal. The trade that never was but could still be, clutchpoints.com. Brett, thank you as always. We will talk to you again soon.
Absolutely, Allen. You have a good one. You have a great weekend coming up.